Still waiting for YouTube and Twitch to catch up. Yeah, okay, looks like Twitch is a go. Just waiting for YouTube now, which always has a little bit of a delay. And hi, Shamsuddin and Seshin and Akshay. Welcome, welcome. Excellent. All right, looks like it's working. Oh, let's see. Actually, I'm getting cut off a little bit in the arm. There we go. Okay, much better. Hello, friends. I hope you're having a better week than I am. We are taking a little bit of a break from our live coding. For sure, this one, maybe the next one. I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to take us to read this paper. And hello, Gerard and Smriti? Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Welcome. So, usually at this time, we are working on a live coding project. And right now I'm at a bit of an impasse. I know the stream got cut off on YouTube last Friday, unfortunately. I don't know what happened, and I still have not gotten to the bottom of that one, and hopefully it just doesn't happen again. But I'm at a bit of an impasse with that project. I'm waiting on some data dictionaries, and also I wanted to read this paper, and I was having a hell of a time focusing. So I figured we could do it together, because that always helps me understand papers a little bit better. Akshay says, so glad you restarted the paper reading sessions, Rachel. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how regular this will be. I don't know. We'll see. Still trying to figure it out. Hello, everybody. Also, I made myself a nice pour over, and I did all the steps, and rinse the filter and did the time, and I did everything except heat the water. So I made a very nice pour over with just room temperature water, and it's not good. I can't recommend it. And that's about how I'm doing. Anyway, we are reading a survey paper about a lot of the studies that have been done on BERT. So I have a meetup talk coming up, and I was putting together sort of like my personal list of the main findings that we, as a field of NLP people. Gotham says, sad to hear about Gustav. Yeah, thank you. For those of you who don't know, my hedgehog passed away on Saturday, which is why my week has sucked. Yeah, but paper. So, and I sat down and sort of like thought about all the papers that I read and talked about with myself mainly, just sort of wandering around the apartment because that's how I prepare talks. Sort of the main findings of BERTology, which is what this field is sort of called, studying BERT. And the three main things that I came up with were, one, we know now that you can get much better results with a much smaller model. And there's a number of ways of doing that: distillation, sharing weights between hidden layers, sparse transformers for BERT as well. So that was the one thing. The second thing is that we have some evidence that the internal weight structure can pattern with linguistic structures. So there's a little bit of hierarchical information being captured, potentially. Although there's other research that suggests that recurrent neural networks and LSTMs are better at hierarchical information than transformer structures, and that I think is still an open question. And then the third thing is we don't have a good understanding yet of the security vulnerabilities of BERT-based systems, but we know that they exist. And actually I think there was an ICLR paper about how easy it is if you have an API serving a BERT-like model to basically query the API in such a way that you can reconstruct the model, which if you have trained the model and that's like your competitive advantage, and it is very expensive to do, it's going to be hard from keeping other people to get the access to the same model that you've trained. So those were sort of my 3 key findings. And this paper is actually on my radar, and I posted on Twitter asking people about, what, I say they're my findings. That's my synthesis of the findings so far. Asking about what key findings other people thought of for the BERTology work. And a lot of people recommended this paper, which I'd actually bookmarked and then forgot existed. And I tried to read it yesterday and couldn't, so we're gonna read it today, and that's the whole story. I hope you enjoyed that, 20-minute introduction or something. Oh, it's just 5, that's not too bad. Question V9 says, can you do a series on BERTology? So, spoiler alert, the next NLP for developers going out on Monday is going to be on BERT. It's part of the reason that I was thinking about it. And yeah, the next one will probably be on sort of like other things that we know about BERT, because I don't think I can fit in sort of a description of the model and how it works and everything that we've learned since it launched in one 5-minute video. I'll try. I don't think it's gonna happen. So, a primer in BERTology. Without further ado, let's just start reading. By Anna Rogers, Olga Kovaleva, I think, and also Anna, or possibly Anna. I don't know which of those it is for either of the Anna or Annas. Rumshiskai. I'm so sorry if I mispronounce anybody's names. It is never intentional. It is me being bad at words. From UMass Lowell. No, sorry, I was like, isn't Hannah Wallach at UMass Lowell? I think she's at UMass Amherst. I think it's a different school, but also Massachusetts. All right, abstract. Transformer-based models are now widely used in NLP, but we still do not understand a lot about their inner workings. Understatement. This paper describes what is known to date about the famous BERT model, Devlin et al. 2019, synthesized over 40 analysis studies. We also provide an overview of the proposed modifications to the model and its training regime. Regimen has an N. Training regime. We then outline the directions for further research. Gutham says, what's an example of hierarchical information? Parsing is a good one. I will say that hierarchical stuff is the part of linguistics that I did not focus on in my PhD. But knowing, for example, if you have multiple clauses in a sentence, which clause what is referring to that's moved to the front of the sentence, and which one it can licitly refer to would be an example of hierarchical information. If y'all have better examples, please throw them in the chat. So, and I'm doing my Berkeley Linguistic Society mug this morning with my room temperature coffee. Oh, that's foul. All right, since their introduction in 2017, Transformers, Vaswani et al. 2017, took NLP by storm, offering enhanced parallelization and better modeling of long-range dependencies. So for RNN-based models, you need to know each time step before you can do the next time step, and you don't need to do that with Transformers, and that's sort of their big benefit, is that you can train them faster if you can parallelize more. The best-known transformer-based model is BERT, Devlin et al. 2019, which obtained state-of-the-art results in numerous benchmarks and was integrated into Google search, improving an estimated 10% of queries. That also happened while I was at Google, actually. While it is clear that BERT and other transformer-based models work remarkably well, it is less clear why, which limits further hypothesis-driven improvement of the architecture. Unlike CNNs, the transformers have little cognitive motivation. CNNs have that much cognitive motivation either. I think they're definitely models that are cognitively informed, but my impression from talking to cognitive scientists is that most of the deep learning architectures are like, it's a very surface level resemblance, and not necessarily, neural networks are not cognitive models. That's my shtick. And the size of these models limits our ability to experiment with pre-training and perform ablation studies. That is absolutely true. This explains a large number of studies over the past year that attempted to understand the reasons behind BERT's performance. This paper provides an overview of what has been learned to date, highlighting the questions which are still unresolved. We focus on the studies investigating the types of knowledge learned by BERT, where this knowledge is represented, presumably in the trained model and not in the architecture, how it is learned, and the methods proposed to improve it. Okay, noted. I was really hoping, and maybe there will be, so there's this thing with BERT and fine-tuning where some proportion of runs on any given task will be degenerate and will just never converge. And sort of my biggest open research question, I mean, I'm not actively doing research, but my biggest open question that I want research about is what sort of tasks is that going to happen with? And can you tell that ahead of time, basically? And it sounds like maybe that won't be in here. I've been asking around if anyone knows studies like that, and I haven't seen one yet. But again, if anyone has any pointers, please let me know. All right, overview of BERT architecture. Fundamentally, BERT is a stack of transformer encoder layers, Vaswani et al. 2017, which consist of multiple heads, i.e. fully connected neural networks augmented with a self-attention mechanism. For every input token in a sequence, each head computes key, value, and query vectors, so those are all learned, which are used to create a weighted representation. And the outputs of all heads in the same layer are combined and run through a fully connected layer. Each layer is wrapped with a skip connection, and layer normalization is applied after it. I don't want to get too deep into the transformer architecture right now. If you're not familiar with it, I have a on the Rasa YouTube channel, there's an NLP for developers that talks about it in a little bit more depth. The conventional workflow for BERT consists of two stages, pre-training and fine-tuning. Pre-training uses two semi-supervised tasks, masked language modeling, MLN, prediction of randomly masked input tokens. So basically you train your model to fill in the blank, where you have like a large corpus and you create the blanks by removing words. And next sentence prediction, NSP, predicting if two input sentences are adjacent to each other. So for example, with that, if we had the conventional workflow for BERT consists of two stages, and then in fine-tuning for downstream applications, one or more fully connected layers are typically added on top of the final encoder layer. The model would be trained to know that these two sentences are not adjacent, and these two sentences are adjacent, is sort of that task. The input representations are computed as follows. BERT first tokenizes the given word into word pieces. You must use the word piece tokenizer if you're using BERT. And then combines three embedding layers, token, position, and segment, to obtain a fixed length vector. So token is for each of the words. This is like a word embedding. Position is done in a very weirdly convoluted way that is, I think, probably my biggest beef with the original paper, which is like it's sign-based. Basically, transformers do not pay attention to position of tokens, and this position embedding gives you a way of saying, hey, these two things are next to each other, these two things are very far apart from each other. And segment, and so that's like the label, basically, for whether or not the sentence is next to each other, for example, or if you were doing fine-tuning for like a classification task, that would be the classification information to obtain a fixed length vector. Special token CLS is used for classification prediction, and SEP separates input segments. The original BERT comes in two versions, base and large, varying the number of layers, their hidden size, and number of attention heads. And also there are, by the same authors, and I don't think they were released with the paper, but many languages worth of BERT pre-trained models from Google. I think there's 102 languages. They added Mongolian and Thai, sort of like in the second pass of that. So that's a very quick overview of what BERT is. And we have here the an example of the fine-tuning. So this would be the input sentences, and then you would run it through BERT, and then at the end you would get a class label out and also an embedding for each token in the input. Gotham says, what does the input look like in BERT after tokenization? Is it one hot encoded? And Anton says, it's a good idea to use BERT for keyword extraction. Gutham, I used to know that, and I do not remember anymore. I'd have to go back and check the original paper. And Anton, for keyword extraction, maybe. I mean, at this point, personally, I wouldn't recommend using the original BERT model for most things, just because it's very large and expensive to run and a little bit slow. And there have been a lot of improvements since the original model in smaller, faster, cheaper models that do more or less the same. So yeah. And Nabil says, segments, I guess, are labeled for whether this token belongs to the first sentence or the second. Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Nabil. Parse trees were covered from BERT. We haven't gotten to that yet. All right, BERT embeddings. Unlike the conventional static embeddings, Mikolov 2013, Pennington et al. 2014, BERT's representations are contextualized, i.e. every input token is represented by a vector dependent on the particular context of occurrence. In current studies of BERT's representation space, the term embedding refers to the output vector of a given, typically final, transformer layer. Gerard says, if not mistaken, tokenization is done with BPE. Yes, that's right, byte pair encoding. It is. Thank you. It's all coming back to me. I read this paper in last year, I think, the original BERT paper. Hi, Sas. And Sachin says, the input after tokenization will depend on the vocabulary used for training BERT, I guess. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe so. I want to say they... Yeah, that sounds right. I don't know. It's been a while since I got real deep into the BERT internals. Oh, that was maybe... There was maybe a better way I could have phrased that. Yeah. That could be Wiedemann? Am I saying that wrong? Et al. Find that BERT contextualized embeddings form distinct and clear clusters corresponding to word sentence, which confirms that the basic distributional hypothesis holds for these representations. So this means that bank like the bank of a river and bank like the bank you put your money in would have representations that are sort of distinct from each other. That's what word sentences means. However, Mikus, could be any of those, et al. Note that representations of the same word vary depending on the position of the sentence in which it occurs, likely due to the next sentence prediction objective. Okay, interesting. So there seems like there's a difference between different senses of words that have the same surface form, so homophones, and also that the same word with the same sense occurring at a different place in the sentence will also have a slightly different representation as well. Interesting. So that's the sort of the idea of contextual embeddings, which I will say BERT was not the paper that proposed contextual embeddings. It had been an active research area for quite a while. Athea Raj, I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong, I almost certainly am. Measure how similar the embeddings for identical words are in every layer, and find that later BERT layers produced more context-specific representations. They also find that BERT embeddings occur in a narrow cone in the vector space, and this effect increases from lower to higher levels. That is, two random words will on average have a much higher cosine similarity than expected if embeddings were directionally uniform isotropic. Oh, that's interesting. I would not have expected that. Okay, so just to paraphrase this, so the earlier embeddings are going to be more like word embeddings, where it'll be the same in all contexts, and the higher you get in the transformer model, the more context-specific it becomes, so the more reliant on the rest of the sentence, which that would be an example of a hierarchical thing, right? So the, words are generally lower in the linguistic hierarchy than things like phrases or sentences, or discourse is generally considered the highest level. And then the embeddings are in a narrow cone. So like in the vector space, they'd sort of be like this. And usually to calculate the differences between two words, you would, they're vectors, and you calculate the cosine similarity, so sort of like the angle measure. And because the words aren't dispersed randomly, they're always going to be more similar. I wonder if that's the case for multilingual BERT as well. It looks like they're maybe not talking about multilingual BERT here, but I would, given that fact, I would expect it to look sort of like a, I don't know, what's a flower that looks like that? Azaleas, kind of, where you have cones for each language in slightly different directions, because there's not going to be a lot of co-occurrence between words in different languages. Yeah, interesting. What knowledge does BERT have? How to count and like colors and stuff? Sesame Street joke. A number of studies have looked at the types of knowledge encoded in BERT's weights. The popular approaches include fill-in-the-gap probes of BERT's masked language modeling, analysis of self-attention weights, and probing classifiers using different BERT representations as inputs. And this is not like world knowledge, this is linguistic knowledge. Lin et al. 2019 show that BERT representations are hierarchical rather than linear. I think I've read this. That sounds super, super familiar. Open Sesame, getting inside BERT's linguistic knowledge. Maybe I have. Sorry, I went all the way down to the bottom of the paper. There's something akin to syntactic tree structure in addition to word order information. Tenney et al. And Liu et al. 2019a also show that BERT embeddings encode information about parts of speech, syntactic chunks, and roles. However, BERT's knowledge of syntax is partial, since probing classifiers could not recover the labels of distinct parent nodes in the syntactic tree. So, I don't have a whiteboard. So the typical way of representing the relationship between words in a sentence is to use a binary tree structure. Does anyone use non-binary? So probably someone uses non-binary trees, but at least in America, binary trees are pretty common as a way of representing this syntactic structure. And so what they're saying here, that it can't recover the label of a distant parent node, is that in a syntactic tree, you might have a sentence like, I ate a banana, right? Where ate will be a parent of the phrase banana, and I'm dusting off some old school syntax here. I believe determiners are the head of the phrase. So banana will be a child of a. And so what they're saying here is that they weren't able to, with a probe, find the relationship between banana and ate when those were very far apart. So that might be something like, I'm trying to think of a sentence where there's a lot of structures in the insides of it between ate and banana, and I can't off the top of my head. Yeah, syntax was, for those of you who have heard me talk about linguistics before, probably my least favorite subfield. It just never gelled with me. Okay. As far as how syntactic information is represented, it seems that syntactic structure is not directly encoded in self-attention weights, but they can be transformed to reflect it. So you can't just look at the weights and figure out what the parse tree would be, but you can use the weights to learn what a parse tree might be, perhaps. H-tut, I'm sorry, I have no idea how to say that, et al. Were unable to extract full parse trees from BERT heads, even with the gold annotations for their root. Nibir says, use the sentence on your room temperature coffee. Yeah, so like I drank my room temperature coffee. My is a determiner, so that would be the head. And so like drank and coffee. Drank should be the head of coffee eventually, because almost all sentences are headed by verb phrases, if you believe certain schools of syntax. Don't come for me, syntacticians, please. Okay, so they can't just get the full parse trees. Jawahar et al. Include a brief illustration of dependency trees extracted directly from self-attention weights, but provide no quantitative evaluation. Oh. Dependency. So I think a dependency tree is like a parse tree. I'm just going to do like a little quick Google. Dependency tree versus parse tree. Dependency parser connects. Sorry, I'll just pop this over. There we go. Constituency parser versus a dependency parser. Constituency parse tree breaks a text into subphrases, and a dependency parser connects words according to their relationships. Okay, I do remember that this is a key difference in the parsing literature. So this is a dependency tree because it doesn't have explicit phrases in it. Does that sound right? Any of you who are really into parsing, feel free to jump in. All right. However, Hewitt and Manning were able to learn transformation matrices that would successfully recover much of the Stanford dependency formalism for Penn tree bank data. Okay, and I'm assuming that's Chris Manning. Jawahar et al. Tried to approximate bursts. Okay, looks like we're changing tax there. Okay, so you can't directly get parse trees. You might be able to get dependency trees. No, these are parse trees. This can't be a full parse tree because these two words are only connected to each other. So this must be a dependency tree. I used to have nightmares about having to do syntax in public, and look at me now. No, it's fine. 20 billion would be raised through... Oh, maybe these are supposed to be connected to this. I'm also used to seeing syntactic structure, again, as a binary tree, so this is a little bit hard to read for me. So raised would be the head. Okay, I cannot evaluate the qualities of these. Someone who can, please feel free to say whether they're good or not. So it looks like you can't get syntactic structure directly from BERT, but you can finagle the weights in such a way that you can approximate syntactic structure. Okay. Which is, I mean, good. Jawahar et al. Tried to approximate BERT representations with tensor product decomposition networks, concluding that dependency trees are the best match around the 5 decomposition schemes, although the reported mean squared error differences are very small. I know some of those words. I have no idea what this means. Tensor product decomposition networks. Okay, so they're trying to get to BERT representations from these networks that I'm not familiar with, and it looks like there's a number of strategies that they tried to use to get between these networks and these representations, and that dependency trees were the best, and presumably better than constituency trees because that's the old argument there. Okay, although it looks like those differences might be negligible. So you can't... So I think the important thing here is that BERT isn't stripping syntactic representations. It is carrying some of that information somehow in the weights of the trained model. Okay, but it is not a syntactic model in and of itself. It requires additional modeling to get from the weights to the syntax. Regarding syntactic competence of BERT's masked language modeling, Goldberg 2019 showed that BERT takes subject-predicate agreement into account when performing the close task. So this would be something like you would say, I am drinking coffee, and not I'm trying to think of one that would never be grammatical. I'm trying to think of a conjugation of to be that would never be grammatical in any dialect of English. I are drinking coffee, I guess, would be the, like, one thing. It doesn't sound bad to me, though. I feel like I can imagine somebody saying that and being like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. So, yeah, no, I'm having a hard time coming up with a very, like an actually ungrammatical example for agreement here, but you know what I mean. This was the case even for sentences with distractor clauses between the subject and verb and meaningless sentences. Meaningless sentences, huh? Interesting. I want to read this paper now. A study of negative polarity items, NPI, by Wardstadt et al. 2019 showed that BERT is able to detect the presence of NPIs, e.g. ever, and words that allow their use, e.g. whether, than scope violations. Interesting. Interesting. So, NPIs, wow, I'm just brushing off the old Linguistics 101 stuff. Well, probably not 101. So that's an NPI has to be licensed, which means one of the head nodes above it has to be negative. So one example, at least in Mayan dialect, would be anymore. So you could say, I can't go to the coffee shop anymore because it is currently closed. But if someone said, I go to the coffee shop anymore because it is open, in some dialects of English, that's fine. For me, that feels like a little bit weird, like I wouldn't say that. So they're saying that BERT is able to detect that anymore exists in this example, and that can't, or the nt and can't, which is the negative item, is also there, and then say, oh, there's an nt, so I can use can. Oh, sorry, anymore, which is interesting. Better than scope violations. Okay. I don't know. So I don't feel like this is evidence of syntax. I feel like this is evidence of learning co-occurrence. But I guess, how do you learn syntax? It is through co-occurrence. I don't know. I don't want to jump into that argument. Dagam A says, drink coffee, I. So that would be like a syntactic order violation. The thing that I was specifically looking for was subject-predicate agreement. So subject is the noun that does the sentence, and the predicate is the bit at the end. Oh, that isn't subject-verb agreement, subject-predicate, so I can't come up with any examples. I'm gonna drink some more failure coffee. All right. The above evidence of syntactic knowledge, the above statistical correlates with someone who does have syntactic knowledge, is probably how I would phrase that, is belied by the fact that BERT does not understand negation and is insensitive to malformed input. In particular, its predictions were not altered even with shuffled word order, truncated sentences, removed subjects and objects, Ettinger 2019. It makes sense to me that a transformer model in general would be able to ignore shuffled word order just because transformers don't take that into account. The author's argument was that the positional embedding that they had included helped to overcome that, so maybe not all the way, like half of a sentence or just removing important parts of it. This is in line with recent findings on adversarial attacks with models disturbed by nonsensical inputs that suggest that BERT's encoding of syntactic structure does not indicate that it actually relies on that knowledge. And I would say, I don't know that it's really structure that's being learned so much as co-occurrence and statistical cues, which is not a bad thing. It's just good to know the limitations of the model. All right, helpful. And this paragraph removes my objections to the previous paragraph. All right, semantic knowledge. Actually, let me zoom in a little bit. I think it might be a little small for y'all. There we go. To date, more studies were devoted to BERT's knowledge of syntactic rather than semantic phenomena. However, we do have evidence from a mass language model probing study that BERT has some knowledge for semantic roles. Ettinger 2019. Is that the same study? I think it's the same study. BERT is even able to prefer the incorrect fillers for semantic roles that are semantically related to the correct one to those that are unrelated, e.g. to tip a chef should be better than to tip a robin, but worse than to tip a waiter, under the assumption, I guess, that chef and waiter are closer in meaning than chef and robin, but that you do not tip chefs, and that is something related to the meaning of the word chef. So that's interesting, but again, that feels... It feels a little strong to call this knowledge to me. And maybe that's just because for me, the word knowledge, especially in this like NLP context, means like structured understanding that is grounded. And I think BERT is kind of has none of those things. Like there's not really any grounding. There's internal structure in the model, but I don't know that that necessarily reflects, the sort of knowledge structures that humans have. Anyway, that's just... I will say that I'm also pretty... As somebody in NLP, I'm pretty conservative about when you can make claims of human-like cognitive models in neural models that are not explicitly cognitive. And there are people who are working on cognitive models using deep learning, but not all deep learning models are cognitive. All right, Tenney et al. Showed that BERT encodes information about entity types, relations, semantic roles, and proto-roles, such that this information can be detected with probing classifiers. Interesting. So Gerard says, maybe the knowledge bit is more related to taking text not only as words, but more of concepts or start of concept. Yeah, I don't think that BERT's encoding concepts either, though. Like, it's it's a very expensive way to pay Mad Libs, basically. And that it's useful that there are some approximations of these linguistic structures, but I don't know that they are... We're not done. Basically, that's what I had to say there. We're not done with NLP, just as we're not done with sort of modeling language. And I can appreciate this as a technical advance, but we can't throw out linguistics yet. Which, I mean, obviously I have a lot of skin in the game when the topic is throwing out linguistics. Okay, so entity types are... I don't actually know what they mean by entity types. It might be like common versus proper nouns. I don't know what they mean by that. Relations, I think entity relations are usually like hypernymy, hyponymy. So like a dog is a type of animal, is a type of creature, I guess, because creatures could be more than animals. Semantic roles, so that would be like source, target, object, agent, patient. Those are pretty well defined. Proto roles I am also not familiar with, but it sounds like this is more in concourse with the semantic literature. Excuse me. BERT struggles with the representations of numbers. Oh yeah, what's his face? Who was one of Pinker's advisees on Twitter is always on about mass language models not being able to do counting. Addition and number decoding tasks show that BERT does not form good representations for floating point numbers and fails to generalize away from the training data. A part of the problem is BERT's word piece tokenization, since numbers of similar values can be divided up into substantially different word chunks. Interesting. World knowledge. MLM, masked language modeling. Sorry, MLM I read as multi-level marketing, which is not, that's not what it means in this context. Component of BERT is easily to adapt for, Akshay says, I feel like I need a primer on linguistic to follow most of the concepts in this paper. Yeah, very much so. So a lot of, in particular, this section of the paper is what linguistic knowledge is extractable from the trained weights of BERT. So there's going to be a lot of linguistic stuff in there. And if you have any questions on anything in particular, I may or may not know the answer, but please feel free to ask. I'm always happy to dust off my degrees. All right. Dribbled a little bit. World knowledge. Masked language modeling component of BERT is easy to adapt for knowledge inductions by filling in the blanks, e.g. cats like to chase blank. I'd probably say mice there, or maybe yarn or toys or something like that. There is at least one probing study of world knowledge in BERT, Ettinger 2019. Wow, this is a big paper, huh? Lots going on in that one. But the bulk of the evidence comes from, drum roll, numerous practitioners using BERT to extract such knowledge. Petroni et al. 2019 showed that for some relation types, vanilla BERT is competitive with methods relying on knowledge bases. Davison et al. Suggests that it generalizes better to unseen data. However, to retrieve BERT's knowledge, we need good template sentences, and there is work on their automatic extraction and augmentation. Sishin says, any place you would suggest to start reading on linguistics for NLP enthusiasts? Yes, actually. There's Emily Bender, who was a professor in the place where I did my PhD, the University of Washington, has a series of books on linguistics for NLP. There's 2 of them, and they are specifically for... They're specifically for people in NLP who are looking to learn more. So here it is. So there's 2 volumes. One of them is on morphology and syntax, and the other one is on something else that I don't remember what it is. But they are both called Linguistic Fundamentals for Natural Language Processing. So again, they're focused on the NLP practitioner and giving you the information that you need. So highly recommend those. Harsh says, can someone help me with an NER related query? I'd probably, if it's specifically about Rasa, I'd ask on the forums. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe somebody in the chat can help. All right, so vanilla here just means like BERT base, I'm assuming. Knowledge bases are usually constructed by hand, and they have information on what different words mean and the relationship between different words. So an example might be that a cat is an animal that likes to chase mice, that is furry. So like the information that you'd have in a dictionary definition, but in a machine readable way. And they are written by hand, very laboriously, usually by people with a large amount of syntactic training. So they are semantic training, rather. So they're expensive. And as such, they kind of only exist for English. I'm sure there's knowledge bases for other languages, but like I would be surprised if there was one for, like, I don't know, Tamil, a language that a lot of people speak. So this might be a good way to sort of like kickstart work on that. And the thing here is that you can get that by sort of like filling in the blank, but you need to have really good blanks to fill in. And you're very welcome, Session. However, BERT cannot reason based on its world knowledge. Forbes et al. 2019 shows that BERT can guess the affordances and properties of many objects, but does not have information about their interactions. E.g., it knows that people can walk into houses and that houses are big, but it cannot infer that houses are bigger than people. And that's probably because the data that it was trained on didn't have sentences like houses are bigger than people, so it didn't have like these sort of neural models are memorizers, basically, that can then use that memorized information to detect statistical co-occurrences and project those into new situations. I don't know, like it's not magic. We're definitely not building intelligence in any sense of the word. All right, Zhu et al. And Richardson and Saberball, I'm almost certainly saying that wrong too, sorry, also show that performance drops with the number of necessary inference steps. At the same time, Portner et al. Show that some of BERT's success in factoid knowledge retrieval comes from learning stereotypical character combinations. E.g., it would predict a person with an Italian-sounding name as Italian, even when it's factually incorrect. So yeah, I think this is very good to know. I might have run across this paper, but I don't think I've run across these other ones. So I really like having this this paragraph basically that reviews these papers really quickly, because this is something that I think especially people who are new to NLP got really excited about with BERT and GPT-2, that they had some sort of like deep understanding of the world based on the language data that they were trained on, and I think this is good evidence that that's not the case. All right. Localizing linguistic knowledge. Section 5. How many sections do we have left? This is probably going to be a two-parter. It's good though. It's very, very rich paper, and it's super helpful for me to have all this information in one place. So, big props to the authors. Self-attention heads. Attention is widely considered to be useful for understanding transformer models, and several studies propose classification of attention TED types. 1. Attention to the word itself, to previous next words, and to the end of the sentence. 2. Attending to previous next tokens, CLS, SEP, punctuation, and attending broadly over the sequence. The 5 attention types shown in Figure 4. So this is Attention Patterns in BERT, Kovaleva et al. 2019. Presumably the same Kovaleva, who's the author of this paper. Also, these sort of attention patterns are one of the reasons why sparse transformers seem to work pretty well, and can capture, information, depending on the type of information you need, pretty much as well as the full transformer. Sachin says more like a book than a paper. Yeah, no, it is. It's a full book. It's 2 books, actually. There may be a shorter paper that covers some of the same information, but there's a lot of linguistics. There's a lot of linguistics. It's a big field. Okay. According to Clark et al. 2019, attention weight has a clear meaning. How much a particular word will be weighted when computing the next representation for the current word. However, Kovaleva et al. Showed that most self-attention heads do not directly encode any non-trivial linguistic information, since less than half of them had the heterogeneous pattern. So this is the heterogeneous pattern. Much of the model encoded the vertical pattern, attention to CLS, SEP, and punctuation tones, consistent with observations by Clark et al. This apparent redundancy must be related to the over-parameterization issue, see section 7. Interesting. So, the argument there is that if the transformer model was really encoding linguistic information, it would have weights that were more heterogeneous and would talk about relationships between other words and not just in the corpus as a whole, serving as a approximation of the language, and not just in the specific use case. So this one is paying attention to the ends of the sentences, right? This one is paying attention to, like, this is self-attention, so this would be to the same word. This is self-attention and the end of the sentences, and this is everything before and everything after the given word. So these attention patterns are going to be task-specific and are not sort of like general information about the language, whereas this attention pattern is more likely to be encoding general information about the language, is what I'm getting at here. And less than half of the self-attention heads had this pattern. So it looks like more than half of the self-attention heads are learning information about the task and not about language in general that could be transferred to other tasks, is what I'm getting from that paragraph. Attention to CLS is easy to interpret as attention to an aggregated sentence level representation, but BERT also attends a lot to SEP and punctuation. Clark et al. 2019 hypothesized that periods and commas are simply almost as frequent as the classification token and separation token, and the model learns to rely on them. This suggests also that the function of SEP might be one of no op, a signal to ignore the head if its pattern is not applicable to the current case. So this would be like switching off the head. SEP gets increased attention starting in layer 5, but its importance for prediction drops. If this hypothesis is correct, attention probing studies that excluded the SEP and CLS tokens, such as Lin et al. And Khatet et al. 2019, should perhaps be revisited. This feels like part of a dissertation. Interesting. So the attention model here. Okay, interesting. So if you have a head that's only paying attention to the separator tokens, it's basically not working. It's not getting and using linguistic information for that particular token, is the claim there. Proceeding to the analysis of the heterogeneous self-attention pattern, a number of studies look for specific BERT heads with linguistically interpretable functions. And this would be, so, I don't know, I posted about this on Twitter a couple days ago. I think on Friday, actually. So a lot of these studies are on the pre-trained BERT models and not on the architecture itself. So the heads here are heads in the trained model, and not the and not like the head in that position, if that makes sense. So in your like transformer, it's not always going to be like, oh, the leftmost head in layer 3, attention head 4 is always going to be paying attention to determiners or whatever. It is that in this pre-trained model, that head in particular seems to be paying attention to that, and there's no guarantee that the architecture will always train a model with that quality. So I just want to be clear about what this is saying about, this information is about the looking at the qualities of the models trained using this architecture and not the inherent structures learned by the architecture, because I don't think there's good evidence that we have that, besides the fact that lower levels seem to be looking at more local phenomenon, and the higher levels tend to be looking at more broad phenomenon, and that's sort of a general observation of transformers. And also I think there's been work on multi-level RNNs as well that found the same thing, that lower levels tend to be more local and higher levels tend to be less local. Is there? No. Yeah. It might be on the gate. It might be on the gate rather than... Anyway, just to clarify that we're talking about specific models that we're looking at here, and not this is a quality of the training, and models will always have this quality if trained using this paradigm. All right. Some BERT heads seem to specialize in certain types of syntactic relations. Hattut et al. 2019 and Clark et al. 2019 report that there are BERT heads that attend significantly more than a random baseline to words in certain syntactic positions. The data sets and methods used in these studies differ, but they both found that there are heads that attend to words in the object role more than the positional baseline. Okay, so what would positional baseline be? The random baseline to words. Okay, so that would be like the third word. So always attending to the third word as opposed to attending to the object, I'm guessing, is what they're meaning there. I could be wrong about that. And then, what is this one? So... Okay, so the earlier study, I think by one of the authors of this paper, was done not on BERT base or BERT large or one of the models from the original paper, but on BERT, presumably BERT large, I don't know, it's not specified here, that had been fine-tuned on the glue tasks. Glue is a benchmark of a number of NLU tasks that the sort of idea is that you want one model that can handle all of the different tasks that are very different. So you're looking for a very generalizable model. All right, the evidence for, so objects, the evidence for n sub, adv-mob, and a-mod had some variation between these subjects. I think these must be dependency terms because I'm not super familiar with them. Maybe noun subject or number subject? Adverb modifier, perhaps? Maybe a word that's being modified by an adverb. Adjective modifier, perhaps? I'm not familiar with these terms. The overall conclusion is also supported by Voida et al. 2019's data for the base transformer in machine translation context. Hoover et al. 2019 hypothesized that even complex dependencies like dobj, direct object, almost certainly, are encoded by a combination of heads rather than a single head, but the work is limited to qualitative analysis. Okay, so is there attention? So can we use attention to find out if there is a BERT head in a trained BERT model that is paying attention to specific syntactic roles? And it looks like maybe. There's some evidence that it might sometimes be possible with some syntactic roles, and some other evidence that complex dependencies could be encoded by multiple heads. Both Clark 2019 and Hattut et al. 2019 conclude that no single head has the complete syntactic tree information in line with a partial knowledge of syntax, see subsection 4.1. So there's no sort of specific section in the model that you're like, oh, this is the syntax head, this is where all of the syntax is being encoded. There is some evidence from human cognitive modeling that we do have, oh gosh, so there's a specific like EEG, I'm pretty sure it's an EEG thing. So there's a specific EEG measurement you can take that will tell you when a human thinks syntax has been done bad, right? So you have a grammatical violation. So for Dagum's example, coffee, drink, I. And I want to say it's like a P600, P100? Ugh. Talk to a psycholinguist. This is not my area. But it is not impossible that there is sort of like one single neural module that is attending to sentence structure. And humans may or may not have that to some degree. Lin et al. 2019 present evidence that attention weights are weak indicators of subject-verb agreement and reflexive anaphora. I am dyslexic, but I don't think that's how you spell anaphora. I'm pretty sure it's PH. Is it? I could be wrong about that. Question, what paper are we reading? We are reading A Primer in BERTology, What We Know About How BERT Works by Anna Rogers, Olga Kovaleva, might be saying that wrong, and Anna Rumshisky. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I am not intentionally trying to mispronounce anybody's name. I'm pretty sure it's PH. I'm just gonna. It is possible that it is in fact a different term than the one that I am familiar with. Okay, no, yeah, I think it is PH actually. I might at them and let them know. So subject verb agreement is like I am, you are, and anaphora is a pronoun, usually referring to something else in the sentence. So, or, you know, not necessarily just the sentence level. So you can say, I'm trying to think of a good reflexive example. I made myself coffee. Myself and I. Myself has anaphora with I, as an example. Instead of serving as strong pointers between tokens that should be related, so like myself and I in my example, BERT's self-attention weights were close to a uniform attention baseline, but there was some subject sensitivity to different types of distractors coherent with psycholinguistic data. Interesting. So, attention weights, you can't use attention weights to get agreement or basically I would call these both sort of agreement generally. But the things that were weighted are kind of similar to some of the things that humans might also weight in the same situation, but not the thing that they primarily weight, I think is what they're saying there. And I'm going to read to the end of section 5.2, and I think we're going to call it there. Clark et al. 2019 identify a BERT head that can be directly used as a classifier to perform co-reference resolution on par with a rule-based system. Oh, interesting. So co-reference resolution is like noticing that me and my friends went to the beach, we had a great time, we relates back to me and my friends. Interesting. And Kovaleva et al. 2019 showed that even when attention heads specialize, no, I clicked on a reference. And I'm going to keep my mouse far away. Kovaleva et al. 2019 showed that even when attention heads specialize in tracking semantic relationships, they do not necessarily contribute to BERT's performance on relevant tasks. Kovaleva et al. 2019 identified two heads of base BERT in which self-attention maps were closely aligned with annotations of core frame semantic relationships. Although such relations should have been instrumental to tasks such as inference, a head ablation study showed that these heads were not essential for BERT's success on glue tasks. Now that is interesting. So basically what this is saying is that sometimes some heads can do encode this information that we know is important for humans, but you can remove those heads, which a human would use that information for a certain task, and the model will still be able to do the task even without these heads that were supposedly encoding this thing that we know is grammatically important for people. Akshay says, Webster defines anaphora as a repetition of word or expression at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, sentences, or verses, especially for rhetorical or poetic effect. Yeah, I think that's a different thing. That sounds more like a poetic term. Actually, if I had to guess, I would say that they're both from the same Greek root and that they have split in spelling and meaning, and actually have been probably borrowed into English multiple times would be my linguistic guess there. Interesting. Okay, so to review so far, what do we know? We know that scroll. So we talked about what BERT is. We know that BERT embeddings are contextual, that they seem to have some sort of distributional semantic hypothesis in them. I think none of these findings were super surprising. We know that there are some correlates of syntactic structure that can be deduced from BERT structure, but that it is not trivial necessarily to do so. You can't just look at the model weights and be like, that's a noun phrase. Looking at semantic knowledge, there is some sort of like memorization of potentially even relationships between words or words that tend to be used in similar situations. But again, BERT is not grounded. It cannot reason. It cannot handle things like numbers and counting. So it's not a fully fledged knowledge model. And then looking at attention, a lot of the intention heads seem to be, particularly in higher levels, turned off much of the time, and looking at this sort of attention to the separator token seems to be signal that those might be turned off. And that even if there are heads that do encode syntactic information, they are not key to performing the task, so they can be removed without significant ablation in downstream tasks. So even if a BERT model sort of accidentally learns syntax in its attention weights, it's not necessarily using that syntactic information in a way that a human would. So again, not a good cognitive model. I don't think that's surprising. It was not set out to be a cognitive model, but I think it can be, I don't know, it can be really enticing to be like, oh, computer do like human do, because we're familiar with how languages do computer. So, Naprasad says, which one is mostly considered, the base or the large versions? It doesn't say in a lot of these discussions. I'm going to assume large mostly would be my guess, because they want to, that's the model that had better performance, and I'm assuming they want to give it a fighting chance. Because if you intentionally use the smaller model that did worse and you're like, it's not good at something, I imagine most reviewers would push back against that. Even though even BERT base is pretty, it's chunky. It's a bit of a chonker. Yeah, okay, so I think what we will do is continue with this on Friday. Like I mentioned for my coding project, I'm still waiting on some, what am I looking for? Data dictionary. I'm still waiting for a data dictionary. And I think it's just going to be worth my time more to wait for that. So we'll continue with the paper on Friday, and I think we should be able to get through it. Oh, good. There is a discussion of MBERT. Fantastic. And yeah, hopefully this was informative. I know it was a lot of linguistics, but I suppose I'm probably pretty well situated to help with that. Feel free to ask any questions on the YouTube video. I'll try to keep tabs on it. Naprasad says, after reading, will we do coding with it? So I mentioned this at the beginning. At this point, I, in general, would not recommend using BERT, just like plain BERT, for your work. There's a lot of smaller, faster models that do pretty much as well. There's a lot of techniques to really compress down the training size. So we're probably not going to be working just with BERT, but this is more of a sort of like a understanding the benefits and the drawbacks of the model sort of thing. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. I hope this was informative, helpful, and we will jump back in with section 5.2 on Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and I will see you then. I'll talk to you later. Bye.